Last time we learnt how to factorize and expand quadratics, which are, as you can see, are in this form here: ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And but now what we want to do is we want to solve quadratics. So in other words, we want to find what x is. So what we'll actually do is in this video we'll learn two methods to find x in a quadratic, and in the next video we'll learn another method. So you'll have three methods for finding or for solving quadratics. So let's start with method 1. And this is using factorization. So this is using something that we learned in the last video. Okay, so let's take the example x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. Now what we want to do is we want to find x. And this method basically uses the factorization method we learned last time to find it. So what you can do is, if you can pause the video and you can try and get this into its binomial form, so into the two brackets, and then you can play this video again when you're ready. Alright, so let's see what we need. So we need two numbers to multiply to give c, which is in this case minus 24. Got to remember that if there's a minus you have to put it in here. And then we also need the same two numbers to add together to give b, or minus 5. Okay, so now what we can do is find these two numbers. So it turns out that these two numbers are minus 8 and 3, because minus 8 times 3 is minus 24, and minus 8 plus 3 is minus 5. Sometimes it just takes a bit of trial and error to get these numbers. Now what we want to do is we want to put it into our brackets. So we have two x's like so, and then we put in the minus 8 here and the plus 3 here. So now we have our brackets, and remember this still equals 0, and this is how we can solve it, because it equals 0. So what we can say is, if we know that this side of the equation equals 0, that must mean that this side of the equation equals 0. That must mean that either x minus 8 equals 0 or x plus 3 equals 0. Because, for example, if x equals 8, we get 8 minus 8, 8 plus 3. But this here, this is just 0. And it doesn't matter what this is, because anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So we know that if x equals 8, this is going to be true. This will equal 0. Similarly, if x equals minus 3, we get minus 3 minus 8, which is minus 11, multiplied by minus 3 plus 3, which is 0. As you can see, that's also 0. So the general method to finding these values here is to see what would make the first bracket equal 0 and what would make the second bracket equal 0. And those are your two values of x. So now we can say x equals 8, x equals minus 3. Those are our two. We have solved this equation. We know that x can either equal 8 or minus 3. And again, we can check. So let's check this. It's always good to check your answers. Check. So we know that it's x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. So let's find out. If we put in 8 here, 8 squared minus 5 times 8 minus 24, that would equal, well, 8 squared is 64, 5 times 8 is 40, minus 24. Well, this just equals 64 minus 64, which is 0. So it's correct, because we want it to equal 0. Okay. Now, how about with minus 3? Let's also check that. So we have minus 3 squared minus 5 times minus 3 minus 24. Now, minus 3 squared, remember, squaring a minus gives a positive, so we get 9. And that's minus 5 times minus 3, which is plus 15, minus 24. Again, we get 24 minus 24, which is 0. So we know that both of those are correct answers using that check. Okay, so that's method 1. Method 2 is the quadratic formula. And this is a nice formula that you can use to solve any quadratic. And if we use the same example as last time, which is x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. Remember, we already know what the answers are, so that will be a good way to check these answers. So the quadratic formula, and you might, if you don't already know this, it would be good one to make sure you know. And the quadratic formula is minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. And that's what x equals. You might have seen this with lowercase. It doesn't matter, it's just I'm representing it in uppercase. But it's for quadratics in form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, like that. So that's how you figure it out. So let's look at this. First, we need to figure out, the easiest thing to do is to figure out what our a is, our b is, and our c is. So our a is 1 here. Now we could put 1 here, but it's not there because it's not necessary. Our b is minus 5. Remember, you have to put the minuses in there. And our c is minus 24. So now all we need to do is put it into this equation. So let's do that. So we get negative b, so that's minus 5. So that's, or let's just put them in like brackets, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so that's minus 5 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is minus 24, over 2 times 1, like so. Okay, now let's let's just tidy this up a bit. So we get minus of a minus, which is just 5, like so. Plus or minus, well, this is going to be minus 5 squared is 25. And minus 4 times minus 24 is plus 96. And obviously we're dividing by 2. Now 25 plus 96 is, well, first let's put that. It's 121, like that, over 2. Okay, so now we've tidied it up. Now, let's see if we can make sure that this is in its simplest form. Well, if you know your squares, you'll know that 11 squared is equal to 121. So we can actually write this as plus or minus 11 over 2. Now what this plus or minus means is that the two solutions for x, sorry, I needed to put x there. The two solutions for x will be, one solution will be when it's plus, and one solution will be when it's minus. So x equals 5 plus 11 over 2. X also equals 5 minus 11 over 2. Okay, so let's look at this. So this is just 16. So 16 over 2 is 8. So we get x equals 8. And this is 5 minus 11, which is just minus 6. And minus 6 divided by 2 is minus 3. So our two values are 8 and minus 3. And of course we could put them back into the equation and check them like we did last time. But if you remember, we use this other method, factorization, to get to the same answers. So this isn't good enough check, because we've already checked this one, we know it's right. So this other method has got to the same answer. So that's okay. And we know that these are correct. So now you can use these two formulas, or these two methods. Now the question is, when would you use one over the other? Well, normally if you have a calculator, the quadratic formula is the easiest and most agile formula to use, and it's also a lot quicker. So I'd always use the quadratic formula if you have a calculator. I'd only use the factorization method if you don't have a calculator, and the numbers are nice, because sometimes the numbers might not be like this, and this method you won't be able to use this method. But remember, you'll still have to use factorization if they ask you to factorize, because factorizing is getting to this point, solving is getting to this point. If they ask you to factorize, you have to use this method. If they ask you to solve it, then you can use the quadratic formula. But obviously, if the question specifically asks you to use factorization or the quadratic formula, you have to follow the question. Okay, so next time we'll have a look at the last method of solving quadratics, and also how quadratics are represented on a